Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're going to get started with the funding round update webinar in just a few minutes. You're all on mute right now, so if you do have immediate questions, please type them into the chat box, and we'll get started in just a minute. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about the 2008 funding round, so thank you for joining us. A friendly reminder, on today's agenda, we'll be discussing changes to the regional funding program. We're going to do a demonstration of the project performance assessment tool, and we're also going to give you some MTP SCS updates. So just some logistics for you to remember during the webinar. You all are muted right now. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the SACOG website within a few business days of today. If you do have a question, please type that into the chat box. We will be stopping throughout the webinar to answer your questions, and we'll be sending a follow-up email after the webinar concludes. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Adrienne Moretz, and I'll be your moderator today. We also have Garrett Ballard-Rosa, who is the Funding Program Manager, Greg Chu, and Victoria Cacciatore. So I'm going to turn it over to Garrett to kick off the funding round.
Thanks, Adrienne. I appreciate that introduction. As Adrienne mentioned, my name is Garrett Ballard-Rosa. I'll be managing the 2018 funding round here at SACOG. So I want to extend my welcome and thanks to you for joining us on this webinar. Really, the purpose of this webinar today is to give out the key information and context for upcoming 2018 regional funding round. And by that, I mean the competitive funding program that SACOG operates, that our board acts on, that is our major regional funding program. The last round in 2015 was about $100 million. This is the major regional funding program for transportation projects. One distinction to call attention to is this funding program is for projects within the 4-county region, so Sacramento, Sutter, Yolo, and Yuba. A lot of what we do at SACOG is for a broader 6-county region, but in this funding in particular, it is for the 4-county region. So really the target audience today are project sponsors or potential project sponsors that have a project in that 4-county area. We've also are going to be demoing a tool that we'll be using in this funding round, but we think may have some applications in other areas, and we'll be giving an update on our long-range plan. So I know we have asked some of our friends in Placer, Colorado to tune in as well. The first 5 agenda items you see on the screen will relate to this 2018 competitive funding round, and then the last agenda item will be sort of the larger 6-county information. So for those of you on the webinar from Placer, Colorado, we'll try to call attention to when we transition to the MTP itself. We really hope sort of the outcomes from today's agenda and webinar will be that sponsors walk away with the key dates, sort of the top-level framework and sort of direction we're heading with this funding round, and really importantly, how to get in contact with us as SACOG staff to also help answer any further questions we've had. All the speakers today will be emphasizing that, but we're open to for you reaching out and to have those conversations and get those questions answered. As Adrienne mentioned, this webinar will be posted on our website. We're also updating our website with all this information as well. One final caveat before I get started on sort of the calendar and then the major changes is that this is the staff proposal for our round. It is subject to our board approval, and we're moving this very information beginning this March committee cycle through our board. So if anything changes, if our board gives us direction to move in a different way, we'll of course let you know. This is the staff proposal. Okay. With that, I'm going to transition to sort of the calendar for this round and give you some of the key information here. And again, we have a cleaned up version of this calendar on our website live now. Just a sort of top level sort of point, we very much understand that this is a very busy year for project sponsors. With SB1 and other funding sources out, we understand that there's a lot of programs out there. We've thought really critically about how best to put our round forward given the constraints we need to operate. So one of the sort of changes to highlight is we're proposing staggering our funding programs so they're due at separate times. Hopefully that eases the burden on the applicants themselves. So really in the spring, we're moving through with the major concepts. We're open to be meeting with project sponsors. In April, we're putting together the fund estimate. So the first key date to highlight is the release for call for projects for the community design program. That would be April 23rd. We follow that the subsequent month with the release for call for projects for a merged regional, local, and bike ped program. Some of the veterans on the phone will know what those names mean. For those that are newer to the program, we will explain what each of those programs are in subsequent items, but those are the distinct programs that we use in our overall funding round. The community design program within the applications we do in June, late June, and then the merged regional, local, and bike ped program would be due in late July. So that's the first 6 months. Really the key dates for you as the project sponsor is when the call goes out and when the applications are due, and that they are staggered across these programs. The second half of the year would then be about the working group, the evaluation, the selection committee, and then ultimately a recommendation to the SACOG board that by the end of the year. That's the main points I wanted to highlight on the calendar. When we're going out with our programs, emphasizing that we're staggering them, emphasizing we do very much understand this is a busy year for you all. Hopefully this is, we did the best we could to find the sweet spot about when other programs are operating and when we need to put our programs out to get everything wrapped up this calendar year. I'm going to pause on the calendar side, and again, a cleaned up version is up on our website with these key dates. Transition to sort of some top level sort of changes about this round, and again, this is just to emphasize maybe how this round looks different for those on the phone that aren't as familiar with how the round happened in 2015 and prior cycles. We will be giving an overview of each program, but I wanted to highlight here sort of these top-level changes. And the first change really sort of involves how we think about and use data in the application for our funding round. As you remember, we spoke with prior project sponsors in the 4-county region about the 2015 round. We also, as we do in all of our cycles, did an internal assessment of our program and really honed in on this idea of data and how it's used. You know, we very much look for sort of applications that are rich in supporting evidence and make a very compelling case of the sort of performance benefits and need of the project. And think there's a big value in a sort of consistent, transparent data set. We very much understand that, you know, with the plethora of funding programs out there, which each one having their own data requirements, how this puts a burden on local applicants. And sort of at large, when you look at all the different funding programs, how it might preclude people from moving forward with an application. So we also are operating more and more under a sort of performance-driven mandate from our board to really delve into elevating the performance assessment of individual transportation projects. Really where I'm driving at with this is we put a lot of thought about what data we're asking in our funding rounds and what we need to do from the evaluation side as well as from the application side. And what we are doing in this round is we have put together a tool that will compile all the data that you need to apply to our funding round. So that's the big tagline. This tool will provide the data that is used in SACOG's funding round. Of course, with every rule, there is one exception, and that is for those of you that choose to speak to the maintenance outcome as one of your performance criteria, we will ask that you provide, if it's a road project, the pavement condition index, or if it's a transit project, a transit asset management data. So, but besides those two maintenance sort of specific data points. This tool, which we will demo at the end of this webinar, will give all the data that's needed in the application. So hopefully you feel like there are some streamlining benefits to the process. We think there's a big value add as well on our end about having this baseline, sort of uniform regional data set that's sort of applicable across all projects in the region. We, of course, recognize that you as project sponsors have a wealth of information about your project. We very much welcome and encourage you to provide that in your application if you so choose. Recognizing that this tool we call the Project Performance Assessment, or PPA Tool, is the baseline. It is sufficient in upon itself to serve the data role in the application, but if you have your own studies, your own traffic counts, whatever that you want to weave into the application, you're more than welcome to. And that just sort of calls attention to the final point I want to make on this major change, is that we think this new quantitative tool will be a good complement to the round, but there still very much is an application. You still, as a project sponsor, will in the application make the case for your project and its performance benefits. Later on in the webinar, we can go into a bit of the technical side of things, sort of the documentation, what data the tool draws on, and really importantly, the opportunity to beta test this tool starting now before it gets finalized for use in the funding round. So again, this was a very high-level overview, really emphasizing this big change of the use of this tool to compile the data you need. Through the end of the webinar and subsequent outreach and conversations, we're more than happy to go into the technical side of things. Final point I want to make about sort of some new changes to our round, how it might look different from those that are familiar with it, is the number of programs we're operating. So traditionally, our round is operated through 3 programs: the community design program, the regional local program, and the bike and ped program, or bicycle and pedestrian program. Talking through all of you in the last calendar year and looking at our own internal assessment, initial change we're proposing for this 2018 round, again, we're proposing this to our board starting in the March cycle, is to merge the regional local and the bicycle and pedestrian program into a single combined program. So it'd be a single program with a single application. Community design would continue as a separate program with a separate application. We can talk more about sort of the methodology and the concepts, but I did want to sort of elevate our thinking behind this. Really, in talking to you, you did elevate the benefits of streamlining where possible, which we definitely took into consideration. Also recognizing just sort of the mentality around sort of how we fund multimodal infrastructure is very different now than it was at the onset of these 3 programs 15 or so years ago, in that active transportation facilities were not always routinely included, and were only really included their regional priorities. Instead, what we see now is that we recognize how cities and counties are maintaining full holistic transportation networks, not sort of isolated modal networks. So really think this merger is about calling attention to how sort of bike and pedestrian infrastructure improvements are a core part of a transportation network. When Victoria, my colleague, talks a bit later in the this webinar about this merged program, she'll emphasize sort of the enhanced evaluation criteria we're using in this merged program, how we're going to put in a minimum funding target for active transportation projects in the merged program, and sort of the improvements we're making to the application. But the point I wanted to emphasize again is in this funding round, we'll be operating 2 programs: community design, and Greg, my colleague, will talk about that right after me, and then a single merged regional program, which combines what was previously regional, local, and bike ped. We think the value in this is it maintains the flexibility of the regional local program, where project sponsors speak to sort of the performance outcomes that sort of resonate to the local context, but then also sort of for those that choose performance outcomes around active modes, really bringing in the enhanced performance criteria that we see in bike and ped. So with that, again, sort of the reiteration of the 2 big changes for our round, the introduction of this data tool, which will provide all of the quantitative analysis you need as a local project sponsor or applicant, and then again, how traditionally we've been moving forward with 3 competitive programs. This round we propose moving forward with 2 competitive programs. I'm going to pause now and turn over to my colleague Greg Chu, who's going to talk about the first of those competitive programs, community design, what we mean by that, and what sort of its performance and guidelines and framework, and what projects are traditionally fund. So Greg, I'm going to pass it over to you now.
Okay, thank you, Garrett. Greg Chu on the planning staff here at SACOG and the Community Design Program Manager. So this round, for those of you that are veterans of the program, it's almost exactly the same as prior rounds with one exception. And I'll talk about it at the end of my part about the project performance assessment. So for those of you that aren't familiar with it, the objective of the fund program is to fund projects in the public right-of-way that promote land uses that utilize the 7 blueprint principles to create community placemaking. And really the emphasis here is on land use. That's the key distinction between that and the MERGE program that we'll talk about, is really how do we promote land uses that help the 7 principles, which are housing options, transportation options, infill development, mixed use, compact development, quality design, and preserving natural resources. Those are the key criteria that we'll be looking at. In 2015, we funded $15.3 million worth of projects with a conditional another $2.95 million contingent on getting the funding. We have not set the target for this funding round yet. That won't happen until April, so right now that's up in the air. As far as eligible applicants, it's the cities, counties, transit agencies, and others within the 4 counties that Garrett mentioned: Sacramento, Sutter, Yolo, and Yuba counties. For the other types of agencies that are allowed to apply for this, these are public agencies that have a master agreement with Caltrans to receive and manage federal and state transportation funds. If you don't know whether or not your agency does have that, you can contact me after the webinar about that. Even if you are eligible for that, if you're whatever jurisdiction, whatever city or county that your project lies in, you would need coordination with that jurisdiction to be able to apply. Typical projects, the bread and butter of this program is streetscape improvements, corridor improvements, main street improvements that help promote land uses that are happening that implement the 7 blueprint principles. We often like to see private investment going on that would be supplemented by the public improvements that this fund program provides for. Application process, for those that are familiar with it, the program in the past, it's very similar. Basically, what we look for is pre-application for eligibility. So you submit a letter telling us what your project is. We ask that you work with your engineering department and with the person who best knows federal and state transportation aid funding requirements, because that's the first thing we look at, is whether or not the project is eligible for the types of funds that we have. Describe what your project is, and then we will give you a response in writing back on our best guess on eligibility based on the information you provide. If there are any issues that we think that you need to specifically address in detail in your application, then we'll also put that in the response letter. Then you submit your application, and then the selection committee will make its recommendations. We will have interviews with all applicants with a team of engineers to make sure your project is still eligible. And then we make a final recommendation that goes up to the board from that point. So fundamentally, it hasn't changed. What we had in our, we did interviews with all the eligible jurisdictions in 2017. Comments we heard were primarily to keep the feedback loop the same, and that's why the application process is pretty much intact. So I did mention one difference, and that's really reflective in the project performance assessment that Garrett talked about. Community design is kind of a different bird than than the other MERGE program in terms of how we're going to do that. It's more of a narrative or qualitative assessment as well as any quantitative data. We don't have a set way of doing things. As far as project performance assessments, you provide a narrative or describe some way that you think land use changes either have been happening or will happen as a result of the funded project. That's what fundamentally we'll be looking at. I will work with you individually about how to best describe that in your application, and we will address that to some degree in our response letter. So with that, that's pretty much the community design program. If you have any questions about your individual project, feel free to contact me after the webinar. My information will be on the last slide. And right now I'm going to turn it over to Victoria Cacciatore, and she's going to talk about the MERGE program.
Good morning, everyone. This is Victoria Cacciatore. I am here to talk about the MERGE program. Thank you, Greg, for the in-depth overview of community design and what people can expect of that in the very near future, assuming that the staff proposal is accepted by the board. For those that are familiar with the regional local program, you will recognize these performance outcomes. They are the same ones that we've had for the last couple of cycles, and applicants selected 3 performance outcomes that spoke most strongly to their project. And that worked for a number of applications, and regional local is a popular program because of the wide variety of projects that fit under the umbrella. You could have ITS projects, there's rural road rehab, and even projects that redefined your urban transportation network. Meanwhile, BikePed was also a very popular program that benefited from a multidisciplinary review committee and the exploration of alternatives to get the right project that would help the agency achieve their transportation goals. So with the proposal to merge this, we are hoping that we give each project sponsor the flexibility to propose the project that they need to make the transportation system that'll serve their residents and also help implement the MTP-SES. So of the 7 performance outcomes, I'll be focusing on number 3, which is increased multimodal transportation options, because that is one of the big changes that we're proposing with this round, to combine the prior regional local and the prior BikePed into one. Anybody who's filled out the BikePed application before has had to answer some variant of the question, how is your project context sensitive? How is it the best project that you could put forward given the area that you are placing that facility? Applicants had to answer, what are the traffic speeds in the area where you're going to put this bike facility? What are the traffic volumes that you're putting this sidewalk right by? Who are your intended users? Is this facility really designed to meet their needs? That is what we are looking to integrate into regional local when we put these projects or these programs together. I have 2 examples of facility selection guidance that people can review to get a sense of what evaluators will be asking when they are trying to determine, does this project actually increase multimodal transportation options specific to biking and walking? This is not to say that SACOG is adopting either of these as the required elements that you need to do to be able to say that, yes, this project is increasing multimodal transportation options, but it's a good frame of reference. So we have the context-sensitive bikeways from the Affordable Housing Sustainable Communities Guidelines, and then what was released last year, National Association of City Transportation Officials, Designing for All Ages and Abilities, Contextual Guidance for High-Comfort Bicycle Facilities. Another part that you will see called out expressly in the merged program application that people who filled out the bike ped program application are familiar with. What were the alternatives that you discussed before you presented this project? And just to get it off the off the table right away, build versus no build is not a discussion of alternatives analyzed. We're expecting that everybody has put a lot of thought into the projects that they propose, and that there was a thorough and quality assessment of alternatives before you selected the final version that you are now trying to implement. While this has formerly been applied, like should you have a Class 2 bike lane here? Should you have a trail that connects these destinations? This really is not specific to choosing a bicycle facility, because your transportation network needs to be reevaluated and often. So if you're rehabbing a facility, what has changed since you originally built it? Are your users and traffic patterns the same now as they were when you originally built this? Do you have the same plans for the surrounding areas now as you did back when you originally built this? What else has changed? Are there new materials, new techniques, new best practices? These are all the things that will be looked at when your project is being evaluated under the criteria. So what do you do next? We know that you have limited staff resources, and we implore of you, please come talk with us. We want to help you select the best fit funding program for your potential project, and recognizing that there could be a couple of options for you. I'd also like to call out, active transportation program is no longer combined with our 4-county funding program, so you may end up having to choose one funding path or another. And it's not always a clear answer, because your trail project might be highly competitive through the new consolidated program or community design, but it may not fit well with active transportation program. And similarly, your complete streets project that you were queuing up for a community design may be a great fit for active transportation program and enable us to bring more money into the region. There is a frequently asked questions document on the regional ATP site, so SACOG, Active Transportation Program. It was last updated February 8th, and it has all of the key dates and information. And to recap what our application dates are looking at for the combined program that I was just discussing, with an emphasis on the active transportation components of it. The applications are proposed to be due Thursday, July 19th. State ATP applications are due Tuesday, July 31st. And we are proposing a regional ATP supplemental application due Friday, August 31st.
Okay, great. Thank you, Victoria. We've heard a lot of information about the regional funding round and some proposed changes. So thank you to Greg, Victoria, and Garrett, who are all SACOG staff. We do want to note that all of the information we are talking about today will be available on the SACOG website, as well as all of the staff's contact information. So if you visit sacog.org and click the funding tab, you'll be able to get all of the information that we're discussing today. Before we transition to the PPA tool demonstration, we do want to take a brief moment to pause for any questions you might have about the proposed changes or specific questions for Greg, Victoria, and Garrett. So we're going to take a brief moment here to pause, and just a friendly reminder that the webinar is being recorded. We will post this on the SACOG website, and we are going to shift gears a bit to talk about the MTP SDS after the PPA tool demo, so stick around for that. So we'll give you a brief moment to type your questions into the chat box. Okay, so we're not getting many questions. We do have a question about the PPA tool specifically. So we're going to jump into the demonstration and then we'll answer your questions after we talk about the tool demo and the MTP SCS update. So I'm going to turn it back over to Garrett and our other SACOG staff, Jeannie Hong, and they'll discuss the PPA tool.
Great. Thanks, Adrian. I appreciate the question about the data and what does it measure and is it really relevant, very much in the front of our minds. We will be providing the documentation of the specific data sources and specific indicators. And to echo my earlier point, we do think there is the value add in this consistent, uniform regional data set, but for you as the project sponsor, if you have your own sort of analysis data that applies specifically to your project, we very much welcome you to move that forward through the application. What might help answer the question is to give a live demo of the beta version of the tool to sort of give you the concept of sort of how we anticipate using it, so you can really start to piece together what we're talking about. And again, I'll emphasize this now and at the end of my sort of remarks. Really right now is the time that we hope to be beta testing this tool with all of you. So on our website that Adrian just mentioned, there's a little sort of a box or pod that you can click on if you want to get your own sort of iteration of this tool to start beta testing. We'll be working with you. So what we want to do now is actually just give you a demo of how this tool works on just a project just in front of SACOG's office, just an illustrative example of how it could work. Show how the data sources get compiled, and then show how it could be used in the funding round. So I'm going to turn over to my colleague Jeannie Hong, who's been instrumental in putting this tool together, to walk through this live demo.
Hello, everybody. So SACOG staff has been working on developing a PPA tool to measure performance, and we started with a desktop version on ArcMap with scripts. We've been working on this for several months, and we are working really hard to get this on an online version, but this is a desktop version with a geoprocessing tool. We've built this tool called Project Performance Assessment Tool. All you have to do as a user will be to input in a line, is what we're asking everybody. You input in a line and you run the program. And as it's running, it will go through 2012 data and 2036 data, and it will output a CSV. Pretty quick for the amount of data that it is processing. On the side, I have some of the files that we're using. We're using collision data from 2011 to 2016. There is intersection data that we have built from our models for 12 and 36. There is existing bike facilities and proposed that we have in there. We are measuring how close to job centers your projects are. And we have the integrated land use data from the 2016 MTP is also. So right now, that's how quickly it worked. What happens is it spits out a CSV that goes into a folder. You want to talk about?
Yeah, and so just to build off of this, Garrett, again, there's a ton of data in here. When we built this tool, we had the funding round in mind. We also we're thinking about the future, about does this have applications and other sort of SACOG processes, and even for you as local project sponsors, how you can use it. So you recognize that this is just showing you the raw data. It's not, the variable headers are still raw and it's not cleaned up. Just to show you the amount of data that's in there, recognize that we don't anticipate or expect you in any sort of way to be familiar with each of these individual sort of data indicators, but just to show you there's a lot of data in here, and working with you in the beta test, if there's something that you think would be useful in your own jurisdiction, a specific one of these, we're happy to see how the tool can sort of help to facilitate that. But what the tool does then is it translates this raw data into a sort of usable evaluation framework for the funding round. So, yeah, Jeannie's going to show you how this is. And again, this is the demo of the tool, which will be an online tool. The tool synced up script-wise into a more streamlined process. This is how it's working in this rough sort of beta phase. So this is the raw data the tool outputs. And it will be input into a sort of evaluative framework that sort of we can use in the funding round criteria to sort of help sort of connect individual projects to performance outcomes.
So for now, we're just asking that you put the data into another database that we have. We're just asking you to paste it, and what happens is that it creates a digest.
So here's how then it starts getting translated into something which hopefully can be a bit more clear about sort of an indicator on specific projects, where this is tied to 7 performance outcomes that are used in the funding round and the specific data indicators within each outcome. So again, this would be the data analysis that would be the baseline in the application. So this is all you would need to do as the applicant. You need to take the tool, which will get online, so you don't have to have an ARC desktop license. Get online, draw the facility, hit run, and then put it into the evaluation framework, and that becomes the basis of the analysis. So what we're hoping is that through beta testing the tool, you get sort of exposure to the data sets we're using per the question I was just asked, get a sense of sort of the projects and how they're sort of lining up in relation to this data set, and then also just on the transparency side, how then this very same data gets used in the evaluation itself when it goes through the selection committee. Just some sort of thoughts on the philosophy of the performance assessment. We very much recognize this is a diverse region per that initial question, and that we have a long history of funding different types of transportation projects across different communities. The indicators you're seeing on the screen very much sort of recognize they are very much relative in nature. So what I mean by that is a lot of them are percent driven. So it's not just if a project is large in scope, it would sort of pop out. They're all sort of calibrated to project size. They also emphasize change through time. They also, in the final evaluation framework, will call attention to the project's local context. So it can give you the score of the project. It does the sort of regional average based on the current MCP FTF plan, the 900 or so projects that we have line work for, and then those projects in the same sort of community or place type. So there'll be that point of comparison as well. And again, we don't ask in the program that you speak to all of these outcomes. We ask that you speak to those outcomes that are most relevant to your project. So we're not expecting each project to have indicators across each outcome. You'll select, and it will be that subset. Again, this is sort of, we're showing this to you as it's being developed. You know, we'll be working on streamlining the process, so we will look forward to working with you on that. Just to call attention to, this is what we expect to be the data side of the merged program. For those projects that are more area or planning type projects that are in a single line, the tool can still accommodate that. You'll just need to work with us directly. We can do a custom geography for that. So we still have those covered in the tool. Again, we'll be posting the documentation about what all this data means, what are the data sources, and how it's calculated, and really, really want to emphasize the opportunity now to be beta testing with us this tool before it becomes finalized for the funding round. With that, I'm going to pause. I saw some questions come in. We can see what of them are relevant for this tool before we transition to the MCP team.
Great, thanks, Garrett. Yeah, we'll take just a minute. If you have questions about this tool, go ahead and type those into the chat box now. We'll take a second to review and answer those before we jump into the MTP. Okay, great. Thank you for entering your questions. We see a lot of questions about the tool, which is great. We're going to answer just a few now, and then we will continue to answer your questions about the tool, the funding round, and the MTP at the end of the webinar. So we did get a question about entering a line into this tool, and the question is, when entering a line into the PPA, can multiple segments be linked? In other words, will the tool accept drawing of a bus route across the region?
And the answer is yes. The way that the tool works right now is as you draw the line, there are buffer values that are created that we do on different buffers for the land use, for the infrastructure, for even the how close we are to a employment center. So no matter what the line is, the buffer values are all the same, and there is, the numbers will reflect that. That's what the analysis is on.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jeannie. And if you have additional questions about drawing lines or about the tool, we'll again provide our contact information at the end of the webinar. We have another question about evaluating vehicle replacement, so we want to address that before we move on to MTP.
Yeah, and thanks for the question, great question. It builds off of the question that Jeannie just answered. The tool allows you to do an area type project, so you can create a custom geography. So if it's a bus line, a bus route, a planned area, an ITS project, we can do that. It might be if you have a really, clunky geography, you just work with us. For vehicle replacement, that's a great question. We're still honing in on how we sort of can complement sort of the narrative-based portion of the application and the data themselves through what I mentioned earlier on the maintenance, where you would provide sort of asset sort of level data and how that fits together in the full package. So we're looking forward to working with you on that. That's going to be very much sort of a complement of the tool, the data provided in the maintenance outcome, and then the narrative component as well.
Great, thank you, Garrett. So we do have additional questions about the tool as well as the information we talked about earlier, but we do want to go over some MTP SCS updates, and then we will have a significant amount of time to answer your questions, as well as provide all of the information we are discussing today in a follow-up email and on the SACOG website. So I'm going to turn it over to Clint Holson and Jennifer Hargrove to give a brief update of the 2020 MTP.
Great. So I know we're throwing a lot of information at you today, so thank you for bearing with us. The reason we wanted to come with a quick update on the MTP SDS is that we do have a couple of calls for project updates and review from local agencies out on the street right now. We will hold a more detailed webinar on the MTP SDS process going forward and what that looks like that will get us to a plan update in 2020, in 2 years from now. But for now, I just wanted to give you a sense of some critical key dates that are coming up for all of you. So the most important one to note right now is March 23rd is the due date for both reviewing the transportation projects that are in the current program and current plan. We're really just looking to kind of get your initial assessment of the scope, the schedule, the costs of those projects. Are there any new major projects or infrastructure transportation projects that we should be considering for this next round of MTP or this next MTP update? And why this is really critical, and it does relate to the funding round, is the MTP serves as the basis for our funding decisions and our prioritization going forward. So it is a pathway both to SACOG's regional funding programs, but if you're going to go after other federal or state grants, your projects need to be listed in the MTP. They may also need to be listed in the program of projects, in the MTIP, in order to have access to that funding. So with the call for projects that we've got out right now, you should have received an email with both with instructions and a memo describing that call for projects. So if any of this sounds surprising to you, or you don't know exactly what you're supposed to be doing, or you never received that email, please let us know either through the comments here, give me a call, and we can make sure we get you up to speed on that. A little bit different from prior project reviews for the MTP, we're asking for a little bit of effort to prioritize projects. We're not asking you to rank your projects or tell us what the most important project in your region or your jurisdiction is, but we are asking for just a little bit more information about, are there any critical or major priorities that you really want to see considered in this next plan update. In terms of other key dates, next Thursday, March 1st, we'll be taking an information item to our board committees on the housing and the jobs forecast and how that compares to the current plan, the base year and the build-out numbers that are also out for review right now, and Jen will talk about that in just a moment. And then we'll also be going to the Regional Planning Partnership on Wednesday to talk more about the call for projects, answer any questions, anything like that. And then I did mention that we'll be hosting another webinar in March specific to the plan update. We don't yet have a date for that, but look for an invitation soon, and we'll go over a lot more of what's the policy emphasis of the plan, what's the direction from our board, from our CEO, what is this next plan going to look like, and what can you expect. And then getting us into June is when we'll be asking our board for some additional decisions and direction on an initial working discussion draft of our land use scenario for the plan, the list of transportation investments, the parameters they would like us to put on prioritizing projects and other transportation strategies for the plan. And then the final thing from me before I turn this over to Jen is we are working on an update to our project website to make a little bit better of a reference for you and understanding where we're at in the process, what we'll be talking about on a month-to-month basis with our board. All of our staff reports will be linked from there. And then when we plan to have additional opportunities for you as local agency staff or any other stakeholders to weigh in on the process and give us your information. So I know that's a ton of things we're asking for in 2018, so we are here to help you get through that. So please don't ever hesitate to contact any one of us, and we will make sure we get you up to speed on exactly what we're expecting or what we need from you, and what the implications might be for your agency and your projects. So Jen's going to jump into the land use side of the review we've got out right now. And then we will be able to get back to questions.
Yeah, so just quickly, I wanted to talk about the land use table that is out for review. So if you're a planner, a land use planner at the local city, county agency, you've probably gotten this from me or somebody in the department has. We're just looking for your feedback on the base year and the build-out capacity. So just wanted to orient you. This is the table that I sent you. The first two columns are a 2016 base year. So that's the number of jobs and homes that we're expecting to have, or not that we're expecting, that we think we have today as of 2016. And then the next column from that called total at build out for jobs and housing, and that's our estimate of capacity in your jurisdiction based on your general plan. The three columns that are kind of shaded in gray, those are from the current plan. I provided those for your reference. I don't need your review of those columns. They're what is in the currently adopted plan. I can't really change them, but they're helpful reference. If not a lot has changed in your jurisdiction and you've spent, the time reviewing this last time, I wanted to show you that, if there hasn't been a lot of change, we reflected that to hopefully streamline your review of this. And the last thing I would say is in terms of your review and what you give back to me by the March 23rd, what I'm really looking for, if you have exact numbers, that's great, but most people, and I'll take that, but most jurisdictions don't. So don't feel like you have to come with all the answers in terms of your review. Your review can just be questions, right? You know your area better than we do. And so if something just looks off, like the job number looks a little too high in this area or a little too low, just asking that is fine. I can certainly dig into our data, see what I can find, and circle back with you. I don't need you to be the one to give me the right number if you don't have it, but just kind of generally gauging, does this look right, or do you have questions? I would really appreciate any feedback you have like that. So that, again, coincides with the transportation call for projects that we're asking for those comments back, or that back to us by the 23rd. I've asked for any comments you have or questions you have on this base year and build out estimate by 2030, by the 23rd as well of March. So I think that's it for the MTP update, but we'll go back to questions.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Jen. So a lot of information was shared about the MTP and a lot of upcoming information via webinar and meetings. So like we're pointing you to the SACOG website for the funding round, you can also go to sacog.org and click regional plans and get all of the information that we discussed here today about the MTP. Jen and Clint's contact information is also available at the end of the webinar and on our SACOG website, and you can ask them specific questions here. So I'm going to turn it back over to Garrett to close us out before we spend some time answering questions you have asked about the funding round, the tool, and the MTP.
Thanks, Adrienne, and thanks for all of you on the webinar for joining us. We really appreciate your time and the great questions we see coming through. We can pivot right after this to answering those questions live, and those that we can't, we're committed to following up with. Really wanted to emphasize, this is our sort of pivot of sort of going live with our thoughts on the next planning round. Granted, the staff proposal we still need sort of board approval. Really want to sort of open up now's the time to get in contact with us about your projects, about your questions about the programs, and we see a lot of questions about the tool, which is great, and emphasize that this is the exact right time to be asking those questions and that we're beta testing the tool. So with that, I want to thank my fellow presenters and the full team for all the great work that's been done. You see our contact information up on the screen, as well as the two key websites, the first for the funding round, the second for the plan, about how to get in contact with us. And this webinar will be posted. So let's pivot back to questions. I see the first one we can let the MTP team go, is just what's the end year of the next MTP? So Clint or Jen.
So our base year is 2016. The end year will be 2040. So the current plan has an end year of 2036. The next one will jump forward 4 years so that we can meet our minimum of a 20-year planning horizon. We still have greenhouse gas targets with a horizon year of 2035. So despite an end year of 2040, we still have a really critical milestone year of 2035 in that plan.
Great, thank you, Clint. So we have a lot of questions coming in, but continue to type those into the chat box. Like Garrett mentioned, anything that we cannot address today, we'll follow up with you individually, and we'll be sending out a follow-up email so we can address some of your questions. So there is a question about the anticipated funding level for the merged program. Are you able to talk about that, Garrett?
Yeah, that's a great question, thanks. That's very much a live area of work right now for the team. We will be putting a fund estimate together that moves through the cycle, our board cycle in April. So look for that. We don't have a specific answer yet on the level. We just anticipate it being a very healthy fund estimate. Again, it's been 3 years instead of 2 years since our last round. Last round we ended up doing about $100 million. We feel this will be a very healthy fund estimate. We'll in April have all the specifics to that question. It's very live area of work, so we don't have the details today.
Great, thank you, Garrett. So we have a lot of questions about the tool. So I'm going to ask Garrett and Jeannie specifically some questions, and hopefully we can address those. If not, we can always follow up with you individually after. So how will the tool work for a new road or road extension?
Yeah, that's another great question. You can work with us to put in a custom geography. It will work. It can draw on the same indicators, and if relevant, we can highlight sort of a parallel facility if there's no existing data, obviously, on that road extension. That would be for sort of levels of congestion, for example, for that performance outcome. But there are other indicators that will work on that facility itself. So again, that's another one. We'll be working with us, creating the custom geography in the tool. Which sort of is a theme I see of a lot of these questions. Recognizing sort of the state of good repair that we talked about earlier, and sort of the combination of the tool, the narrative, and the supplemental maintenance data. A lot of the other questions will be, these are great questions. We can get the right sort of geography mix in the tool that recognizes what your project does. Same for sort of transit and road. So I'm trying to read these live. Same for sort of road versus transit, which also is covered by which performance outcome you choose to speak to. Again, we say the tool will spit out the data for all the performance outcomes, but you're only evaluated on those that you choose to speak to. So that's another way that that's considered.
Okay, great, thank you, Garrett. So we do have an ATP question, so this might be addressed to Victoria. Will the regional ATP combined program require the state's ATP application format?
And at this point, the draft state active transportation program guidelines are requiring that you apply to the state to be able to compete in the MPO 6-county program. So in short, yes, but not at SACOG's hand. So you would have to still fill out the state ATP application for your project.
Great, thank you, Victoria. So Garrett, this might be a question for you. How many years will the merged program be programmed for?
Right, that goes to the earlier question about the fund estimate. We're anticipating, again, the fund estimate in April will give the details of how long we go out. We're anticipating probably for CMAQ and RSTP for 2020, 2021, maybe 2022. For the STIP, we do need to take into consideration the Tier 2 augmentation from the class prior cycle, but likely 2021/2022 and 2022/2023. Now, that's very technical, probably most of you understood what I was talking about. But again, that's really a question for the fund estimate. We don't have that finalized today on this call. That will be very much in the next month and a half, getting that all lined up and moving forward with that item in the April board cycle.
And could you remind us when you anticipate these guidelines be released?
Yeah, great question. Thanks for elevating that. So we will be now pivoting and doing the guidelines for each program. So community design guidelines will be moving forward in the April cycle as well, and that's where you'll get the sort of specificity about the guidelines and the framework. We'll be moving forward with the draft guidelines for the combined or the merged regional program at that same time, with the final guidelines moving forward in May, and then having those finalized by our board before the call for projects at the end of May. So the next 2 months, where we roll out this was the top level overview of the programs. The next 2 months, we roll out the fund estimate and the guidelines by the programs. We wanted to emphasize today that there'll be the 2 programs with the guidelines, community design as one, and then the merged program as a separate guideline.
Great, thanks, Garrett. So a few more tool questions that we should address before we jump off the webinar. Can the tool be used for community designed projects as well?
Sure. I'll start, and then I'll pivot and transition to my colleague, Greg Chu. Very much the idea of the tool is to provide all the data needed for the applications. I think, as Greg mentioned in his explanation of community design, it's a different flavor of evaluation. So let me start with this distinction before I turn it over to Greg. The tool for the merged regional program is the required part of the application. You, as the project sponsor, will be using the tool to generate those tables we showed you, and that will sync up with the application itself, so it's a required part of the application. The community design is more sort of a resource or a supplemental piece of information. If you want access to it to put together your narrative, it's a resource for you. Greg, I'll ask you to add to that.
Yes, and thanks, Garrett. What we're trying to do in community design is however you want to make the case for the land use changes you're anticipating or that have occurred relative to your project. That's what we want to hear about. So if you want to use the tool to make your case, feel free to use it. If you have other ways of doing it, including narratively, that's fine too. We consider it all. We don't have apples to oranges, or we have a lot of apples and oranges, and we just have to consider all that together when we look at your application.
Great, thank you, Garrett. So there is a question I think that would be relevant to the group, which is you're asking people to use the demo of this tool. Do you have a specific date that you would like them to provide feedback by or use the tool in the demonstration phase?
That's a phenomenal question. The demo is going live today. We can powwow internally about that date, and we should have that, and we'll get that up on our website, and that we do need feedback in advance of when we finalize the tool. So I'm sorry that we don't have that specific date in front of you right now. The idea is it's live today. This isn't your only opportunity to get on the beta testing, but hopefully you can get in early. Let's put our heads together internally about when we need all that feedback in, and how we can still get, on the technical side, how we can get that incorporated in terms of a final usable tool in advance of the call for projects. So thanks for that question. I'm sorry I don't have a specific date for you today.
But we'll certainly post that information on the SACOG website and distribute it to the applicable groups when we have a date. So that's great. So we'll take one or two more questions before we close out the webinar. Again, all of the emails for the presenters today are listed on the screen. You can get all of the contact information for the SACOG staff who spoke today about all of the different programs at sacog.org. And just another reminder that we are recording this webinar and we'll post it on the SACOG website for your review. So Garrett, you talked about taking this proposed items through the board cycle, but will it be presented to RPP or TCC or the other committees?
Yeah, so this webinar and our board cycle, so our board mail out today, is the first unveiling of this information, but we are now pivoting towards sort of our outreach. So it will be going to the RPP this month. It will be going to the TCC. We just had TCC yesterday or 2 days ago, so not this cycle, but a subsequent cycle. So yes, very much now we're pivoting towards the general outreach, but recognizing that our board and then that this audience is the first sort of unveiling of this, and then also going through our standard outreach channels.
Great, thank you. So we're going to pause here for a few more questions. Thank you all for joining us today. We'll be sending you a follow-up email very soon. Again, you can go to sacog.org and click either the funding tab or the regional plans tab to get all of the relevant information we're talking about. So with that, we'll pause to accept a few more questions. If you have them, you can type them into the chat box. So we'll give you a few more minutes to enter those before we close out today's webinar. So we're not seeing any more questions come in. Thank you all for your participation. We know we gave you a lot of information today. So in closing, again, visit the sacog.org website, click the funding and regional plans tabs, and contact us should you have any questions. Any member that presented today can provide the information to you or get you the right contact, the right staff person to address your questions. Thank you again for joining us today. We'll be sending a follow-up email soon, and look for this webinar on the SACOG website early next week.